So my name is Sean Reed. I run a nonprofit that's called Alliance for Girls in STEM, and we're a publisher. And what we do is publish picture books for girls, probably before the age of 8, let's say, that show girls as the main characters in the stories with science-based themes. And so we have our first book coming out this year. It's called Serena Sees Her Footprints on the Moon. And it's about a little girl who imagines a trip to the moon, and she interacts with some of the things left up there by the Apollo astronauts.
When did you get started with this publishing company? When did you get started doing it?
Well, it was kind of a long time coming, and it finally just started happening. Because I've been writing the books, and so I had a couple of different previous drafts of things that I thought weren't quite ready. But the first idea really came out when my niece was about 6. And I was trying to find a book for her on Amazon that talked about space and it had a girl as the main character. And there's not a lot out there. There's not a lot about space in general, but then when you start talking about female main characters, then you're in princess land for the most part. And so it was much more difficult than I thought. And so it was really, I really discovered it was much more of a systematic thing. And then even when you dive in a bit more, you start talking about girls of color as main characters. Then you're in rare territory. So those were kind of the first kind of thoughts and looking around and seeing things. And so maybe about 3 years ago, I started the company, and I was going to publish a couple of other things I wrote, but didn't happen until last year. So last year I finally got a manuscript together that I liked for this particular story I was talking about, Serena, and then I was able to find an illustrator. Through Twitter actually, which was an amazing thing, and she blew me away with just her initial artwork and a couple of cover designs, and so we've been working together for the last couple of months, and we finally just got all of the illustrations done March.
What did you want to do when you were a little kid? When you grew up, what did you want to do?
I was always into science and math. I used to read a lot though. Like I think probably starting from 7, 8, 9, I would just read books all the time. And it was different things. It was like Encyclopedia Brown and science fiction, like all the classical science fiction things. And I guess looking back on that, that's probably one of the drivers for me getting interested in science, but also interested in writing and publishing at the same time. But I wanted to be an astronaut, I guess, up until, I don't know, you go through the right thing, right? You want to be president, like 4th grade or so, and then you want to be an astronaut, and then, but I always knew I wanted to do something related to science, and then I got to undergrad, and I ended up doing physics. So I did a physics undergrad, and I spent some time as a math teacher, and so a couple other things that were I kind of stayed on that path for a while, and then I kind of got distracted and ended up working in finance for a number of years. But the science has always been kind of the primary thing. So definitely anything around science, anything around teaching, education has always been my interest. So this project for me kind of pulls in together a lot of my life, because always wanting to pass on the science is always a absolutely critical thing, and be like the person, be one of the people waving the flags and saying, kids, isn't this great? Don't you want to do this? And also being creative about it and having a little fun with it. Primary things.
Was there ever a moment in that journey when you felt like giving up? And if you didn't give up, why did you give up?
Yeah, it's always hard. Because the first thing I wrote was an absolute disaster. And I didn't show that. I showed that to one person. I was like, no, don't look at that. It was a ridiculous. It was sort of like, if you can imagine Josie and the Pussycats, except with real cats. which sounds, now that I say that, it sounds like more of an Adult Swim kind of a property. But so maybe I'm gonna go back to that at some point. But yeah, it was a disaster. I didn't feel like giving up because that made me realize that I was doing something that I shouldn't be doing. Like I was out of where my area of knowledge was and where my comfort zone was, which was going back to science and connecting kids to science in some kind of way, in some kind of a simple form. And so There are a couple other things, but the other thing that was really useful is actually I got last year a grant from the Awesome Foundation in New York, and that was like going through the application and writing out kind of really succinctly what we're doing and why, and then getting it's like an external validation, right? Like, oh yeah, you can get some money for this project. This is a good project. And so that's always helpful because you never know, like, especially as a writer, you never know if you're just deluding yourself or whether it's actually something useful. And so, talking to people and figuring out, hey, this is something that they don't see, and this is something that they might like to see, that definitely helps keep me on track.
How has your cultural upbringing influenced your style, Sean?
I think it's more than the style. I think it's influenced where and who I want to give representation to. Because I don't know if you're aware in terms of like the picture book industry, like the last couple of years, there's been a lot of movement towards making sure that there are diverse books that represent, the people that actually live in the world as opposed to the people who approve books to get published. And those two demographics are very different. So making sure, the influence of Brooklyn for me is like making sure that if I'm writing a topic, I'm giving representation to people who don't have it, especially in the virtue of the nonprofit. I mean, that was the most important thing to me. And I didn't know, I didn't know what, like, for example, this lady's character, when I was writing it, I didn't necessarily know what she looked like for a while. And then, and the process I was talking about with the rain feed and developing about the moon, that all happened last summer when Wimbledon was on. And so Serena is really from Serena Williams. That's kind of the name, that's where the name came from. And that kind of making sure that, that's where the Brooklyn is. Like, just making sure that you're showing the kids that you want to help, something that will be useful for them in their life. I mean, there's always kind of like phrases like you can't be what you can't see and things like that, which are a lot of that's true. I mean, sometimes you can overcome the barrier of reading something that's not necessarily about you, but you can make it about you. But it's so much easier if you can see an image of someone who looks like you, and someone who looks like you who's interested in science, and someone who looks like you who is a little girl who's interested in science. I mean, it's like a whole, it's drilling down into some area that's really underrepresented, and trying to help that in a way that's not necessarily a coding camp, right? I'm not teaching any physical skills, but I'm kind of showing, something that they might not necessarily be able to see in the culture, in the world around them.
Where do you draw the line between your art and self-esteem enhancement?
Yeah, that's really hard. That's really hard. It's a great question, because when we're putting the book together, even the artwork, there's a piece in the beginning of illustration in the beginning of the book where it shows Serena with the 12 astronauts who have been to the moon. Right? It's only been 12 because there were 6. There were like 6 Apollo missions that landed, and the Apollo 13 is the one that never landed. So it was a picture, and Sam, our illustrator, she drew a picture of the astronauts in spacesuits with the visors open, right? The visors open, it was all white men, and Serena. And so we were thinking about does that do anything to self-esteem of the reader by looking at that stark contrast? So what we ended up doing was actually just deciding to put the visors down. And so you only see her, and you see astronauts in spacesuits, but you don't know what their gender is. You don't know anything about race. You just see her, and she is the part of it. So yeah, I worry about the esteem from that way in terms of what do I want the reader to see. Now, in terms of what I want to create and whether people might want to see that, I don't know. I think I guess we'll find out. I'm not really sure, but it's like some, especially like working on the sequels for Serena now. Like one of them is about her going to Venus, and one is about her going to Jupiter. And the Jupiter one, I think, is probably going to come out first because it's just really unusual, and it kind of goes back to the earlier point I was talking about in terms of bringing stuff I read into the books. There is a play that I read that uses what the hell is it called? Alice in Wonderland. And it uses like some of the scenes of Alice in Wonderland to tell whatever particular story that she was telling. But just the beginning of that reminded me that there was a tea party in Alice in Wonderland. And so the Jupiter trip is kind of wrapped up in a tea party that Serena's having with her dad, where she's telling her dad about Jupiter. And so, yeah, it gets a little, and I'm just letting it go, and I'm hoping people like it. But it's that part's probably more for me than anything else.
What do you feel is the biggest misconception people have about African American authors in children's books?
Yeah, I think that every children's book has African American authors or African American kids has to be about race. I think that's probably the primary thing. But if you look at children's books is it's a huge area that they talk about. You can play with your friends. Like everything is not necessarily all about race when you're a little kid. You can just show little kids having fun and engaging in stuff they like to do. But I think to the extent that there are picture books by African American authors, a lot of them get pigeonholed by the publishing companies. It's like, oh, we only want something from African American author if it's about race. And so I think that's one of the big things that I found. And again, I kind of decided to self-publish all of this right off the bat because the industry is difficult to begin with, and I kind of like the control of being the publisher and just figuring out kind of where I wanted to fall in the whole spectrum.
What advice would you give to that young person if they wanted to get into your line of work?
Oh, I mean, it would be, for me, if you're an illustrator, if you have skills doing that, that's like the most fundamental thing. Because I can't draw anything. And so I was just lucky to stumble on someone who kind of really got where I was trying to go in terms of illustration. So if you're a young writer, find a friend who can illustrate, because you can put together a book and have it be an ebook, and it's going to cost you very little. So you can publish books. I mean, there's a huge publishing industry that exists outside of the mainstream. So you can get your book published. The problem always comes with the marketing part. Like once you're out there, you are now one of 5 million other books on Amazon, and so your book has to say something to a niche that is interested in that. And you have to find them. You have to know who they are, and you kind of have to have that in mind when you're thinking about what you want to write. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I think once you know who you want to reach, then you can figure out, associated with that will be you'll figure out what you want to say to them.
What is artistic freedom to you?
Artistic freedom to me is kind of goes back to what I was talking about with how what the book is supposed to look like and what do I want in the book. Because if I look at like Serena Sees Her Footprints on the Moon, right? It's a very non-traditional story. It has a beginning. It has an end, sort of, but it's really more showing a snapshot of her life. Like it's not really a traditional story. And so before we had any artwork, I actually, a friend of a friend is a literary agent, and I showed it to him, and I was like, hey, this is the manuscript we have. What do you think? And he was like, I don't know anyone who would necessarily take that because again, it doesn't have a traditional structure. And so artistic freedom for me is like, okay, that's fine. This is what I'm doing now. that's really it. Like if I want to emulate Alice in Wonderland and put and put Serena in a tea party with her father overlooking Jupiter, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. And that's, and so far, you know, I was able to you know, do the crowdfunding and get people supporting the book. But I think, you know, they know they're going to get something that doesn't really exist. Because and that's another thing maybe, if you're a publishing company, you kind of have an idea about what already exists, right? But you don't necessarily have an idea about what could exist. And you don't have the interest level in exploring things that could exist when they don't make you any money. And so this whole, like, there's a genre that kind of doesn't exist in terms of science fiction and science books for kids, in terms of, you know, fictional stories. It doesn't really exist. Like, there are books that people have made, robots, and, you know, there's a couple of things, and there's a lot of books based on like big blockbuster movies like Star Wars and Transformers, and those kind of have some science elements, but there's not really science, like books that have science facts but that are also fictional. Like, it's kind of like the genre doesn't really exist that I've been able to find, other than like ones and twos. And so, like, this is a whole different thing, and I can, you know, if I'm a big company, you know, I can see how they're like, I don't know what to do, you know, I don't know where that goes. But as me, you know, little self-publisher, and I, you know, finding a good illustrator to be able to do that, I have the freedom to do it.
What will you create?
What will I create? Well, I want to create this company. I want to create this as a publisher, and I don't know, you know, obviously I don't know how it's going to play out, but I do believe that there are definitely people out there who want this. Like, you know, I've heard from a lot of them. And, you know, if I were a big publishing company, it would be awesome, because I would have a marketing machine, I have a marketing department, and you go and you find all these people and you tell them, hey, we have this product for you that you might like. So to be able to grow an organization that can do some of that, that'd be great for me. That's what I want to create.